Well, we're still discussing God's truth about forgiveness.
Yeah.
There's a lot of groundwork.
There is.
Now I'd like to move on to measuring when forgiveness has occurred. So we're going to talk about the process of the mechanics, I called it, of forgiveness in our next discussion. But first I just want to ask you about our own, like our ability to measure when forgiveness is actually complete inside of us. Obviously God knows and God's laws are measuring it, but is it possible for me personally to measure when my process of forgiving another person is finished?
Definitely. Obviously, God wanted to make it as easy as possible for us to know when we've forgiven and we've completed the process, you know. And the same probably applies to repentance, of course. You know, God wanted to make it as easy as possible for us to know when we have fully repented for something.
Yeah.
But when it comes to forgiveness, to knowing whether forgiveness has occurred is really quite simple. We have emotionally forgotten. That doesn't mean we have intellectually forgotten. In other words, we still remember the event. We can still recall the event. We can still recall all the occurrences that cause the particular emotion to exist within us, but the emotion doesn't exist within us anymore. So it's not a place of denial of emotion. It's a place where you've released emotion through experience to the point where now you've forgotten what the emotion feels like. Now, we had an example of this just recently in a channeling that we did that people may have listened to, or may be listening to. I know it's not out yet, but it will be out soon. But by the time they get this recording, it will definitely be out. And that's the channeling we did with Sonia and Amantu regarding Sonia remembering her third sphere experience. She couldn't remember the emotions. We started talking about the emotions. She said, I can't remember what the emotions were. So we had to invite Amantu, a person who was helping her, to relate. He remembered the experience she had, and we could relate some of the emotions she had it more easily than she could remember them. And that's because he was emotionally connected to helping her, so he could connect with the experiences she was going through. And she was going through the experience at the time. It was very intense for her. A 2-year experience, I think it was, or a 3-year experience, I think it was, that she went through in the third sphere to go through some emotions about desire. And yet, when we talked to her, now that she's in the celestial heavens, she couldn't emotionally remember. She said, oh yeah, I had this feeling. And I said, well, how does that feel like? Can't remember, right? And this is what it's like. You emotionally, when you have forgiven, you have emotionally forgotten the event. You can't recall the emotions that were related to the event anymore. You can still recall the event, but you can't recall the emotions anymore. It's like they're gone, and they are gone. When you've forgiven, they are gone. The beauty of them going is that they no longer harm you and no longer cause you to harm others. There's no driving force in you anymore that causes any harm to you or harm to others by retaining the emotion.
So that's how we'll know when there's no, it's almost like...
There's no resentment, there's no pain, there's no guilt,
emotional charge related to the memory. But I was reflecting as you were speaking, it's almost like a lot of times, because we just spoke in our previous section about how often we're not very sensitive to things that we have to forgive. It's almost like we go through a process where we're almost in denial of what we need to forgive. So we don't even remember it very well intellectually even.
But usually in that state too, we don't even remember the events either.
That's what I mean. We don't remember the events. We don't really remember anything involved. Then we become more sensitive and suddenly, whoa, there's all this emotional charge within us surrounding the memories.
All sorts of things. Anger, resentment, rage, fear, hatred. All sorts of things.
All kinds of things, and it feels very emotionally.
It feels out of control oftentimes.
And then, but now during that process, we're becoming more aware of the actual events, and when the sin involved, we're sensitive, becoming more sensitive to the whole process.
Saying, well, that was really off. what they did was really bad.
Yes.
It was really wrong from God's perspective.
Which is, so we're identifying for ourselves that there's something for me to forgive.
Yes.
We're seeing that two-part process that you explained earlier, that somebody wished to harm me and I have a feeling about that.
And I still feel things about it, you know.
Yes. And on the other side of forgiveness, you're saying that actually there's no emotional charge. However, it seems as though we're far more aware and fully informed about what the sin was towards us.
Correct.
And we have a more complete memory of it. So when you mention forgive and forget, a lot of people see that as a forgetting of the actual events, when actually it's more like forgive, forget the emotion, but really have a full knowledge of the events and the sin involved.
Yes. Yeah. See, God, part of the process from God's perspective here is to help us understand sin and its consequences, whether we perpetrate it or others have perpetrated towards us. So if we actually went through this entire process and come out the other end not understanding what the sin was, then we haven't begun the process really properly.
No.
And we haven't actually finished the process either.
Yeah.
To finish the process of forgiveness, we need to understand what the sin was. And we need to see that it was a sin. We need to see that somebody else perpetrated it towards us.
Yeah.
And we need to see that we had emotions as a result of their perpetrated, emotions towards us. And we need to release these emotions in order to completely emotionally forget.
Yeah.
So that's the process of measuring it. So it is able to be measured, but again, it requires ethics on my part.
Yeah.
Like I can say, oh, I've forgotten about that, and really I'm in complete denial.
Yeah.
Or I can say, oh, there was no, you didn't do anything wrong, which is also complete denial.
Yes.
Because the person did do something wrong.
Yeah.
So that is complete denial too. Or I can say, no, you did sin. But I've gone through the emotions now, and I've gone out the other side of these emotions, and now I don't really feel anything about it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting thing that will happen too with regard to the law of attraction is the law of attraction will demonstrate to us that we've completed the process
Yes.
by not bringing the same perpetrated act towards our life. So it'll actually demonstrate that we've completed the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when I say not bringing, obviously when we're at one with God, we still have people bringing harm towards us.
Yeah.
But we will see that they are the persons through their attractions that have attracted these events rather than us.
Yes.
Yeah, so we become informed in that regard too.
Yes.
We know who attracted or who created the event. When we're still in a state of not forgiving, we participate in the creation of the events that trigger us into forgiveness.
Yeah.
Once we've completed the process of forgiving, we no longer participate emotionally in events that are perpetrated towards us.
Yeah.
Interesting thought.
Very
Because
interesting.
we're basically saying there that when we don't forgive, we are partly a perpetrator of further harm towards ourselves.
Yeah. That's a sucky thing to feel, isn't it?
Well, I don't know.
I think it's powerful and wonderful.
very
but-
powerful.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Because you start seeing that the act of not forgiving
Yes.
perpetrates unloving actions towards yourself.
Yeah. No, it's only sucky when you want to hold on to resentment.
Well, it's only
And
sucky,
not
I feel,
forgive.
if you want to harm others or blame others for what they've done to you. So, but the reality is, it's very important to understand that fact.
Definitely.
Yeah. So there's some very important principles in there
Yeah.
that help us measure
Yeah.
whether we've truly forgiven or not.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So that's how we personally can measure if we've completed the process of forgiveness.
Yes.
So let's move on now to how God defines forgiveness and repentance.
Sure.
I'd like to just give a summary of God's definition of forgiveness.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So how could we summarize God's definition of forgiveness?
Well, basically, what we're doing here is just revisiting, isn't it, some of the things we previously said about forgiveness. So basically, forgiveness the conditions have to exist,
Yeah.
firstly. For
So someone has
forgiveness.
to sin and wish to harm me.
Not necessarily wish to harm me, but they have harmed me.
Yeah. Wish they sin, so they disobey God's laws in some way,
Yes.
and they harm me through that process.
Through that process. Whether they were aware or not is measurable in quantity.
Yep.
But the actual harm has occurred, the sin has occurred, the actual harm has occurred. That has to have happened first.
Yep.
So that the conditions now exist
Yep.
under which I need to forgive.
Yep.
So God's definition of forgiveness is, firstly, the conditions have to exist
Yes, for me to have something to
for me
forgive.
to have something to forgive.
Yes.
Secondly, I need to go through a process,
Which we'll talk a lot about the process.
which is later,
Yeah.
but I need to go through a process which results in my no longer emotionally remembering the harm that was done to me.
Yeah.
And once I've completed that process, I will no longer remember that any harm was done to me, even though I will remember the event.
Yeah.
But emotionally, I will not remember the harm. I've completely forgotten the harm. You can see that means that the person who harmed me, I'd probably feel okay towards as well, obviously.
Yeah.
Because I don't any longer remember the harm.
Yeah.
So I feel okay towards him.
I would, again, as we mentioned in the previous section, I would be very, very aware and fully knowledgeable about the harm that they did to me,
Yes.
and about the conditions within them that
Cause
caused their harm.
Yep.
So I'd be fully informed, but there's no emotional charge towards that person.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Awesome.
So I've completed, I've emotionally forgotten, basically, what the person has done.
Yeah.
I've emotionally forgotten it.
Yeah.
Not through denial, not through Alzheimer's, not through some other intellectual or emotional condition,
Yeah.
but I have truly gone through the experience of releasing those emotions to the point where I've emotionally forgotten. Now, of course, when I'm at one with God, because there is no emotional resonance in me, that process is instant. I forgive as God forgives when I'm at one with God.
Yes.
And the way God forgives is there's no emotional resonance inside of God for there to be any harm that God feels about the thing. And so he instantly forgives. It doesn't mean that I feel the benefit of that forgiveness, because I have to go through repentance issues
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get on to all of that, but this was just a very brief summary.
Yes.
So we established clearly sin, harm against me that I have released the memory of. It's all gone from me. God says that's forgiveness.
Yep. Isn't it wonderful?
It's awesome. It's awesome.
It's an amazing place to be, of course, because it means so much for our lives and so much for our welfare and so much for our physical welfare and our body, and like there are so many benefits to it, but most of which people on earth have no idea about, because they just think that forgiveness is a sort of an imaginary state of a religious person.
Yeah.
But the reality is quite different.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.